Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yonit Arthur. You are on the Steady Coach, and I have so much to tell you about this interview. I'm going to try really hard not to forget all the things I wanted to say. The reason I'm so excited about this interview is we are finally talking about internal family systems here on the Steady Coach. Many of you may know, many of you may not know, I'm an internal family systems practitioner. It's not the only modality that I use with my clients, but it is a major one that I use. And I think it's so helpful for people with medically unexplained chronic symptoms. And I found the perfect person to talk to me about this amazing topic, Susann Suprenant, who herself is an incredibly gifted internal family systems practitioner, as well as a Feldenkrais practitioner. And if you don't know what Feldenkrais is, it is a type of movement therapy. And Susann explains how these two types of therapy can interplay with each other and help someone with chronic physical symptoms. Today, again, we're going to be primarily focusing on the use of internal family systems to help people with chronic dizziness and pain. We're not going to go a whole lot into depth on what internal family systems is today, though. So I wanted to give you a quick primer before we head into the conversation. So internal family systems, or IFS, as you may hear us refer to it in the interview, is usually thought of as a therapeutic modality, but it's used in many other areas as well. And I kind of think of it more as a philosophical approach to helping people heal than just a form of psychotherapy. What IFS assumes is that we have multiple parts. And when we say parts, it's not weird. It just means like there's a part of me that wants to eat this piece of cake, and then there's a part of me that says you probably shouldn't eat that cake. This is the way our minds tend to work. We have these different parts that want different things. Internal family systems is a way of working with these parts to help people gain insights and healing. And again, in my work, I have found it highly effective. So again, so excited to bring you this interview. Another thing you're going to hear us mention in this interview is that Susann leads curable groups. And for those of you who don't know what Curable is first and foremost a very low-cost app that is designed specifically for people with chronic physical symptoms. It's awesome, and you can get 6 weeks free if you use my affiliate link, which I will put in the video description or the podcast description. From there, if you want to learn more about curable groups, again, I suggest you try the app out first, but Susann does lead some of those groups. Susann also has her own private practice and leads her own movement classes, so you can find out more about that on her website, which I will also post as a link below. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. Oh yeah, one more thing. Susann did mention to me after we finished this interview that she thinks that people with dizziness have a particularly hard time, not just because of the symptoms themselves, which of course can be very dysregulating, but because she says other people tend to see dizziness as somehow threatening. Pain is something people feel is just kind of a universal experience. And although dizziness is actually incredibly common, and we'll talk in other videos about exactly how common it is, very common, she says she gets the sense that people with dizziness are treated differently than people with pain, and that this contributes to why people with dizziness often need more support during their recoveries. I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to share. Okay. I think that's all I wanted to share before we start. Please enjoy this far-reaching, awesome conversation. I look forward to hearing your questions and comments. If you're listening to this as a podcast, please consider heading over to YouTube to join the conversation. It's so nice to hear what you think of the content. And anyone, of course, please like, share this video or podcast, subscribe or follow. All of those things help me reach more people. And if you enjoy this kind of content, please consider leaving us a high rating on your podcast platform. That also makes sure that other people see this content. All right, let's stop talking. Go enjoy the content. Susann, thank you so much for being here. Such a pleasure to finally meet you. And I think we're going to have such a useful conversation today.
Likewise, I really appreciate the invite, and I'm just so pleased to learn about the work that you're doing with folks and getting the word out. It just,
Oh,
yeah.
likewise. Likewise. I was telling you right before we started recording that I was just, it was like, oh, finally I found a fellow IFS practitioner who's
That's
working
right.
right in this chronic physical symptom space with me in the same way that I am. And I just can't wait to have this conversation because I reference IFS a lot. And yet this
Yeah.
is the first time I'm explicitly talking about it on my channel. So it's just
Oh,
an exciting
wonderful.
occasion. Yes.
I'm
So
so pleased to be your IFS.
my inaugural IFS person.
Yes, that's
Yes.
right. That's
Yes.
wonderful. Yeah, I'm very
Yes.
honored.
Well, before we get into IFS and all that stuff, would you mind
Yeah.
just telling us a bit about your experience working with people with chronic physical symptoms? Because you have a lot of
Yes.
experience with this.
Yeah. So I work with clients and students, and I facilitate groups as well. So I have my own private clients. I offer my own classes, and then I also facilitate groups for the app Curable. If you're familiar
Yes.
with that, or your
Very much so.
your folks are, and so
Yes.
there's the app, and then there's the sort of value added. If they want to go deeper with Curable, they can go with groups, and then I'm one of the facilitators for that. So on any given day, I'm seeing somewhere between 5 and 25 folks, through my, and then, times 4 or 5 for each work day. So I'm seeing, somewhere between, I don't know, 50 and 100 folks with chronic symptoms every week. And and so it's just amazing to see just the change that's possible. When I first meet someone, either through groups or when we start working together, there's despair and shame, blame, fear. There's all of this discouragement. And then by the end, they're like, oh, wow, I'm not pleased that I had these symptoms. They're awful and I wouldn't wish them on anyone, but if I hadn't had them, I wouldn't have sort of awakened to myself in this way. And so it's really rewarding. Yeah.
Oh, it is. I know it. And
yeah.
I would never, what you just said, I would never put that on someone and say, you're going to be grateful this happened. Never. I would never say that to someone. No. It's a refrain I hear over and over and over again. I just hear it over and over and over.
Yeah, it's a crucible of sorts, or some kind of a threshold that people go through,
It is.
Yeah. And but when they're in that early phase, it can be very, very just disorienting at best.
Disorienting both figuratively and literally for my cohort here with dizziness.
Yeah.
So I want to just point this out. So you mentioned Curable. Actually, I'm an affiliate. I refer people to Curable all the time.
Nice.
And of course, I'll put that link in the description. But
please,
what I wanted
that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so people can check it out. But what I wanted to mention was that when people download the app or when they hear Curable, they think, oh, pain. They're working with chronic pain. And so my big question for you, Susann, not just in your work with Curable, but also in your private work, do you see dizziness? Is that one of the symptoms that you see?
For sure. I see dizziness in probably about 3 different iterations, I guess. I see dizziness as a primary symptom. Like I have chronic dizziness of some sort, right? And then I also see a dizziness that is associated with migraines.
Yes.
And then I also see dizziness as what, I don't know if the term is still being used, but a symptom imperative. So that sort of whack-a-mole thing. So, you know, started with back pain, got that figured out, and then, oh, now my hips hurt, or now my feet hurt, or now my this or that, you know, whatever it is. And so sometimes in that, I think I heard you call it like a symptom carousel.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. Also an apt name for people who are dealing with dizziness, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I was like, that is a great image. So, so sometimes I see it as like, oh, you've got the symptoms on the run. So like now that that shoulder pain or that IBS or whatever it might be, it is no longer a primary complaint or difficulty, but what's this new symptom, this dizziness or whatever. So I think I see dizziness with clients and group members or students in one of those three ways. Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear this. Again, I'm not surprised at all, given just the volume of people I see. Clearly, it's a major issue. And I was just reading some research this morning saying that the estimates have quite a range, but they're saying about 11% of people in the United States are dealing with some kind of ongoing dizziness issue. That, again, most of them probably don't think of it as necessarily a medical condition. And of course, you and I are seeing the small percentage of those, but it is actually a very common symptom and a very common mind body or neural circuit symptom.
Yep.
So how, again, not to derail us from all the amazing things I want to talk about, but
oh no, please. Yeah.
derail us.
Yeah.
So how important then do you think it is for these particular clients to hear you say that you see dizziness, or that you can speak dizziness related language to them rather than using pain centric verbiage when you're helping them? Right.
So, I mean, I think that it's essential for people with mind-body dizziness, you know, some sort of chronic dizziness, medically unexplained dizziness, whatever term people are using. I think it's like crucial for them to know that this is not just one of the, or like some sort of outlying chronic symptom. It's a major one. And that it's kind of a paradox in that it's very different than other chronic symptoms in some ways, some important ways, but it's also really important for folks with chronic dizziness to know that it is just another of these mind-body symptoms, so that the trajectory for recovery looks just like, and the hope for them is just like all the other folks.
Hearing you say that was reassuring to me. So I can only imagine how that landed with people listening. So thank you again. I think it's just so important. This is why I have the channel I have, because people need to hear their symptoms specifically in order to know that they can get better.
Oh, so that's so important. Yeah.
Thank you. So, okay. So now we're going to jump ahead a little bit. So people who've been on my channel before have some sense of how threat mode in the nervous system or activation in the nervous system can cause symptoms. But everyone explains it a little bit differently. So I was hoping you could give us your brief elevator pitch on how this works.
Okay. Yeah. Wouldn't that be funny if someone in an elevator wanted my
I know.
pitch? That would be
I feel I do
wonderful.
get these pitches sometimes. I really do.
Yeah, that would be great. I guess I'm not sure how succinct this is, but I would start at the very beginning and saying that being alive has the most critical task that we have is staying alive. So like there are other things to do, but none of them matter if we can't stay alive. So our, as a living organism, that's our very first job, is to stay alive. And so we have in order to stay alive, we have a nervous system that continually scans. Is this safe? Not safe. Safe? Not safe. Like always just checking. So anytime I take a step, even like, is this surface going to support my weight? Is this surface, have enough friction for me to not slip? Like every single moment, we're not thinking of it, but, safe, not safe, safe, not safe. So that's great that we have that, because here we are alive. The problem becomes when the part of our nervous system that is working to perceive threats doesn't line up with actual threats. So we've got a perception of threat and we've got the actuality of the threat, and they're not aligned. So we want to know when something that we perceive as a threat is actually a threat, because then we can, not step in front of that moving vehicle. That would be really wise.
Amen.
But
yes.
But if we perceive that there's a threat and there isn't a threat, that's now our system doesn't know how to resolve that. And so this threat mode, I see as, it's not pathological, it's adaptive. We're supposed to be scanning for threats. We're not supposed to even really be conscious of that. We're supposed to act on threats that show up. When we when we have a mismatch between perception and actuality in threats, then we're trapped in a cycle of trying to resolve that. And that's where symptoms come in, whether those symptoms are pain, or I would say especially dizziness. The symptoms like those tell the body, tell this organism, stop moving. Because when you don't know, like, is this a threat or not? I'm confused. You've got to stop. And pain tells us to stop. Dizziness tells us to stop. And that's where we get sort of stuck in that. So what, the work of mind-body therapists, coaches, educators is to help people realign the perception of threat with the actuality of threat.
I loved that pitch, and I would stay in the elevator all the way to the end to hear that.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. So what's interesting is, so we talk a lot on my channel about the reactions to symptoms. And that's a big part, obviously, of this mismatch, this threat mismatch or threat perception mismatch.
Right.
But that's not the only thing. Perception of symptoms themselves or physical triggers themselves, that's only part of what leads to this overzealous or over-responsive threat response, right? So this is where I start to think, okay, when someone is finding that they're reacting differently to symptoms, but the symptoms are still there, to me, that indicates threat mode is still ongoing, and there are other things beyond reactions to symptoms and triggers that are still involved. Would you, first of all, agree with my explanation there?
Yeah. Let's see if I'm understanding. I guess, are you talking about where someone is having a symptom triggered? Why are they particularly sensitive to that environment, whereas others wouldn't perceive a threat in that environment? Is that sort of what you're talking about? Or are you talking more about like just the feedback loop of feeling threatened by the symptom?
So I'm talking about, So what I'm talking about is sometimes we use tools like somatic tracking, for example, and that feedback loop, like, okay, I'm starting to learn that trigger is no longer dangerous. I'm starting to learn that symptom is no longer dangerous. So that component of threat mode starts to calm, but we still have other parts of people's lives that are contributing to this nervous system sensitivity or to this threat mode. And so where I think that internal family systems, IFS, or other forms of coaching or therapy or work come in is not just in helping people address their reactions or their obvious reactions to symptoms, but also to try to figure out where else in their lives issues are being stirred up that cause the nervous system to be as reactive as it is.
Right, right. Exactly. So yeah, like you're saying, somatic tracking, like a really wonderful tool to, as I see it, decouple the experience of the symptom with the fear of the symptom. That's, essentially what I see somatic tracking doing. But that doesn't mean you wouldn't be triggered by something else I'm just thinking of an example of someone who had a particularly chaotic childhood, and there was a lot of volatility with these periods of quiet. What's going to happen next? Right. So the quiet wasn't a calm quiet. It was, when does the next shoe drop sort of quiet.
Right.
And so you might have, two friends go on vacation. They go to the lakeside or the beachfront. They sit on their beautiful beach chairs. It's a lovely breeze, sunny day. And the one person is like, oh, isn't this lovely? And the other person is like, oh my God, I can't relax. This is awful. Like, this calm tells my parts something. This level of calm means chaos is about to erupt.
Right. Okay. Yes. And even more so than for interpersonal conflicts, which can happen kind of in the blink of an eye before we even realize we're being triggered, right? Emotionally, I mean, right? Like someone can say something completely innocuous, and a person who had a lovely childhood might say, oh, okay. And then someone who heard that phrase used in a chaotic childhood could have this nervous system tension arise without even realizing it. And that can also lead to symptoms.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
So I guess I'm approaching this question from the back since we're already discussing it. But so where do you see IFS then as having a special role in addressing either one or both of those components, both responses or relationship with symptoms themselves and relationships or responses with other sources of threat?
Yeah, I mean, I see it. It's the primary modality that I use, in my work, and so I see it as central. The basic idea is that we, all of us, just the psychic environment that is our mind, we have multiple parts of us. And that this isn't a pathology, it's, we'll say, oh gosh, there's a part of me that really wants to go for a walk, but there's this other part that just wants to kind of lay here on the couch, and that's just how our minds work. And so that's already sort of in the popular language understanding of just how our minds work. But with IFS, I think more importantly, there is an awareness of something deeper, a core self. In IFS, we just call it self, capital S. And that's where healing is possible. So what my work is, and other IFS practitioners, is I help people learn to access that self energy and form relationships, become, connected to, befriend these different parts of them. And that brings harmony to the system that resolves the triggering that is non-symptom related, and the fear and the distress around the symptoms. And so, what recovery looks like is that those symptoms are no longer needed. And we can talk more about what the heck that means.
That means, well, that was juicy. We're coming back to that. But let me see if I am understanding what you're saying. So it sounds like there are systems of parts that organize around the symptoms, and there are systems of parts that organize around other potential sources of stress or threat or distress.
Yeah, I think maybe it might be helpful to maybe step back a bit and just look at like what kind of roles parts play in our internal system. So when like our parts are useful, they're necessary, they're wonderful, they are how we get things done. There are abilities, there are qualities. And yet sometimes they will take on some extreme roles, some even say maladaptive behaviors, but they do it for good reason. They do it to try to protect some vulnerable and usually very young vulnerable parts. So if there was, something very scary, something very disappointing, something very disconcerting, that some kind of wounding when we're young, and that's what it is to grow up, is to have things come up that are sort of beyond our developmental capability to process, then instead of, growing into adulthood still having temper tantrums, we tuck those parts away. We say, we can't have a meltdown. And so the part of us that's super scared or super angry or really upset in some way, we tuck that away. In IFS, it's called an exile. I usually just call it a vulnerable part. So we'll tuck that away. And to keep it tucked away, a protective part will come in, whose job it is to keep that exile safe from the outside world so it doesn't get hurt again, but also to keep it from sort of bursting out and causing a meltdown.
Sure. So,
right?
So you could see maybe how a dynamic like perfectionism or like being super self-critical would emerge from something like this.
Right. So these protectors who, they step in and they say, never again, this little one is never going to get hurt again. And nor is she going to like burst out and cause a meltdown that is going to threaten relationships and such. And so this protector who's committed to this protection has to find different strategies to keep that little one tucked away. Perfectionism is a strategy, right? If I can keep her getting, always having all her ducks in a row, always getting the gold stars, then that little one inside won't get hurt, right? So any of those personality traits that we see in the personality profile for people with chronic symptoms, those are strategies that parts use to protect those vulnerable parts. And that's where symptoms come in. So symptoms are often a strategy that a protector is using. And so the work that I do is essentially to help the client connect with that protector. And when that relationship is, trusting and open and connected, then that protector will say, I can't, it's really hard to keep this little one safe all the time. And I need your help. And so self can go in and help that little one heal. And that's a whole process in IFS. And then the protector doesn't need to use that strategy any longer. In fact, we'll even ask protectors, if you knew, let's say someone is having a particular symptom, right? Maybe headaches with dizziness or whatever. And we might pose the question to the protector, if you knew, like hypothetically, but if you knew for a fact that that little one that you're protecting was indeed safe, would you still need to create this dizziness? And they're like, no, this dizziness isn't fun because I got all these other parts that hate me for it. But I'm invested, like I am committed. So I don't care. Even if I'm vilified in the system, I'm going to keep doing it. But if I knew this little one was safe, of course I wouldn't create this symptom. And then I can ask, well, if you knew it was safe not to create the symptom, what would you rather do? There's so many wonderful qualities that these parts have. And they're like, oh, I would help her, I don't know, write that book she's always wanted to write, or, go on that, I don't know, hiking trip across Europe or something, like whatever it might be. These parts have they've got lots of energy and wonderful aliveness that right now is being focused on keeping that little one safe.
Yes. Interesting to hear your description here. So I just want to clarify for people, and then I'll pose some scenarios that I've come across, because I sometimes see different dynamics here. Yeah. Do you get the sense that it's always or often a part deliberately creating symptoms?
No, sometimes it is. Sometimes it's like, that family gathering is not safe.
Don't go.
And you don't know how to say no. So I'm going to come in with a migraine and take you out so you don't go to that. And so until you learn how to say no, I've got your back. And boom, but other times parts will use a strategy like intrusive thoughts, catastrophizing, hypervigilance, something like that then will lead to chronic symptoms.
That was going to be my next question, because sometimes when you ask inside, no one really knows. Like, no, there's no part that takes responsibility for a particular symptom. And I find, especially with like kind of vague, like dizziness type symptoms, not always, but this often seems to come up, where it's not a single part that's responsible. It's like, it's like an energy. I'm sorry to use that term. You're probably fine with it, Susann, but just for other people, like, she's using the word energy.
I know they're like energy.
But it's like it's an energy that's being created because of conflict or distress in the nervous system or in the system.
Yeah. So what you're bringing up is really important, and I guess the term in IFS that we would use is polarization. So let's say I have a client who has some symptoms that are distressing.
Right.
Great. It's in some ways it's less likely that we would just like dive right in and be like, all right, let's figure out who this part is that's creating this symptom and whip them into shape. It doesn't work that way. What I'd be more likely to do is to, follow the client's sort of curiosity or level of distress, because it's more likely that the entry point is a part who hates the dizziness.
Yes.
And fears the dizziness, and maybe despairs ever getting better or whatever. Or
judges the client,
or judges
being dizzy, like you're not going to be able to support your family. This is right.
Yep. And you did that, you did that expensive therapy and it didn't work. It's some kind, thinking it was a physical cause, and you're just, whatever shame, blame comes out, so those are the parts that are oftentimes feeling the most distress. And so if there is a client who has a part who just, really unhappy with the dizziness, we might, get to know that part first, and then see, like, are they polarized with another part? that is, angry at the part that's angry at the dizziness or whatever. And so finding, I don't know, following the curiosity, following where the stirred up distress comes in. It's not necessarily like, oh, we got to go in and find the part that's creating the dizziness.
Right. Go find your dizziness in your body and see what happens when you ask it questions is not how we typically start. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. More likely, like when someone, in an IFS session, when they like sort of offer their attention to the dizziness, and I ask them, how do you feel toward that dizziness? They'll be like, oh my God, it's ruining my life. I hate it. Great. Let's get to know that part, because that part is in a lot of distress.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Beautifully explained. And I'm glad this is just as much a wonderful conversation for me as it is for people listening, because again, I don't get to run into many other IFS practitioners who work with chronic physical symptoms. So I'm like, oh, good. Okay. We're seeing the same things. I'm not just making it up. This is great.
You are not.
I'm not just making it up. So that's what you just described is what I meant a few minutes ago when I said there are systems organized around the symptoms. Like there are parts reacting to symptoms and triggers. And often, Susann, you can tell me if this has been your experience as well. Once we have that entry point, I often find that the parts that are reacting to symptoms are parts that have a lot of important information about other sources of stress in the person's life, whether that was earlier stress that's not necessarily deeply impacting the person on a day-to-day level, but more often than not are parts that were formed during early or particularly distressing times and are impacting how the client was living life before the symptoms even started. So that entry point, I think you just gave people something really interesting to start with. And I was wondering if you are open to it, maybe you could tell people a little bit more about how they could start to work with this part on their own. So say someone has a part that hates their dizziness. That's a pretty common one, I'd say. What would be the first step in starting to work with that part?
Yeah, the first step would be to just tune in and notice when I feel this aversion, hatred, unhappiness, distrust, whatever it is, when I feel this anger toward the dizziness, where do I notice that in my body? That would be the first step. And some people will be like, I feel my hands clenching or my jaw clenching, or I feel my my chest is contracted, or my breathing is up here, or just noticing what do you feel? Where can you notice that part of you that hates the dizziness? And can you just offer it some breath? Not saying calm down part, but turning to it and saying, oh my gosh, hi, you hate the dizziness? Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Of course you do. I'm here. What do you need? I've got some breath for you. How about if I just be here with you and offer some breath and some understanding, right? So think of it as a small child. There's a thunderstorm. If you're in Florida, you've experienced a thunderstorm before.
Oh, yes.
And if you're, if you're with a child that you're caring for, that you care about, and that child gets terrified of this thunderstorm, no, you can't take that thunder away. It's thundering. There it is. But you can turn to the child and say, oh my gosh, I get it. Of course you're afraid of that. It's very loud, isn't it? Here, sit next to me if you'd like. I'm here. What do you need? And depending on your relationship with that child, maybe they want to snuggle. Maybe they want to do something fun. Maybe who knows what they might want to do. Maybe they just want to be held or rocked. Maybe they want to hear about how when you were little, you were afraid of thunder too. So that's what we, as IFS practitioners, that's what we facilitate with our clients, is from their self, they turn to these angry, scared, distressed parts and say, I'm here. You're not alone. Because it's one thing to be scared, and that's not fun, or angry, or whatever distressing thing we might be feeling. But it's another thing to have distress and feel alone. That's just awful. And so if we feel distressed, that's a part of us that's saying, help, where are you?
Yes.
So
yes.
That's what I would say would be the first step is, we're not going to meditate this away or medicate this away. This anger gets to be there and gets to be, I don't know, opened to.
Yes. And what a message of safety that is when you relate to yourself in that way.
Yeah, it's a trope in movies and TV about the crabby, angry neighbor, and everybody else is just like, he's crabby, she's awful. But then our hero comes in and sees, oh, well, they're lonely. And they form a relationship with this crabby neighbor, and beautiful things come from it. I mean, we see that storyline again and again because it's how this works. When connection and when we feel connected, when we feel truly listened to, when we don't feel shamed or blamed for having the actual feelings that we're having, then we can relax into that and start to feel safer.
It's such a paradox, and it's so hard for people to wrap their heads around this, because they'll hear, if you just describe it, you took your time in explaining that, but if you just kind of describe that in a sentence, some people might say, oh, so I'm just supposed to like fall into the hole of the distress and just be distressed, be really distressed. But what you're describing is being in a bit of an observer stance, first of all, and being there with the distress, not being the distress, which I've explained to people, because I work with a lot of very analytical people who sometimes can't feel things in their bodies at all.
Right.
I say sometimes if you're very in your head, it's just semantic. It's just the way you say it. I'm so distressed, I hate this dizziness. You can say, I notice there's a part of me that is holding distress and hatred toward this dizziness. And that alone, just saying it to yourself in that way, creates an I and a part. And then there's space for a relationship to occur versus when you just are the feeling or are the thing itself.
Yeah. When you imagine that you are the feeling or the thing, there's no space for relationship. And exactly the technique that you're describing, we can even break that into steps so that, and it can be a somatic practice even. So you can start with, let's say in the scenario you described, someone has a part of them that hates the dizziness. Then you can start with like, I am angry. And just spend time. Yeah. And let yourself feel, what does that feel like? What's my breath like, etc. This is actually a meditation that the IFS practitioner and meditation teacher, Locke Kelly, uses, right? So like once you've really given yourself a chance to feel, I am angry, maybe you could try the next step of I feel anger. And then just notice, How is that different? What is the quality of that sensation in my body? That's an important step. And then going to the step of, I'm aware of feeling angry. What's that feel like in my body? Then I'm aware that there's a part of me that feels angry. Now, what does that feel like? And people will get the image sometimes of a part outside of them, or they'll feel like now there's some space. Oh, now I can offer some comfort, some understanding to this part that feels angry.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of being, as we say in IFS, instead of being blended with the part that's feeling so angry, then, it's just being stuck in a very cloudy day. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the metaphor that is used in IFS. Oftentimes when we are in a cloudy day, we look up, that's all we see. So it seems like it's cloudy, it's dark and gloomy day. But if we were to get up in an airplane,
the sun's there.
The sun's there. The sun is always there. That's our self-energy. It's always there. But when these parts come in and cloud us, it can seem as though it's dark and gloomy, but the sun's always there. If we can get enough distance, we can see the clouds and say, oh, we can start to have appreciation. Oh my gosh, that's how water condenses and rain comes down and life goes on. So clouds, yes, but it's not all of this whole planet is dark and gloomy at this moment.
Yes. Yes. Beautifully stated. And one of my favorite aspects of IFS, and why it's generally my primary method as well.
Yeah.
Because I've spoken on my channel about many different methods, experiential forms of therapy that also leverage memory reconsolidation, just like IFS. But IFS has a very optimistic and beautiful view of human nature that really resonates with me. Yeah, it has a constraint release, like the sun is there. Our job is to work with the clouds versus we need to figure out how to turn on the lights because you are in the dark. Like there's a difference there. And when I approach someone through that lens that you just described, they feel that. They feel that I know that on the inside, they're okay. They're good inside and they're okay. They're okay and they're going to be okay versus kind of a more pathology oriented
there's clouds. How do we get rid of the clouds? As opposed to, oh, wow, isn't that interesting? It's really cloudy. Huh. How do I connect with those clouds and just get curious about them?
And they are probably here for a reason. Why are the clouds even here? Like, right? They're doing something for the person.
Yeah, exactly.
So for the skeptics and analytical people among my audience right now who are like, okay, she's gone off the deep end. Can you just maybe say a word about how effective you've seen IFS be for people who are dealing with chronic physical symptoms?
Oh, gosh. I don't have all the details of the research study, but it's essentially how IFS became classified as evidence-based. So, the study in Boston, I don't have. I should have. I can always
put details. Yeah.
Right, but people with, was it rheumatoid arthritis? I'm thinking, rheumatoid arthritis. The diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis and the onset of that had many of these patients feeling really depressed, really anxious, really just at sea about their identity as someone who, could take care of everybody else and that sort of thing. And so the hope was that IFS could be used in this trial to just help alleviate some of those symptoms of depression and anxiety, let's say. So it did that. And it improved their symptoms.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And these are in people who have, again, not to make this a stark dichotomy, but people who had physical, like evidence of tissue damage or some kind of disease process.
Right. You can test in for something like rheumatoid arthritis, as opposed to it's not solely a functional diagnosis where we just, a medical professional just speaks back your symptoms to you, which is in multisyllabic.
Right. Which is what most of the people watching this right now are dealing with, the latter, where there's their bodies are perfectly healthy and whole. Why do they feel so awful? So even more in that case, we would expect something like IFS, or again, another modality that utilizes some of these principles, memory reconsolidation specifically, to alleviate symptoms. And I'm curious, in your experience, if you could speak to that, if it's been effective.
Certainly. Oh, very effective. And it makes sense when you look at it from the neuroplasticity or this threat mode or whatever. If what IFS is doing is bringing more harmony into the system by helping people access self-energy and connecting with their parts and helping resolve the distress that these parts are feeling, that feels like safety.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right. So essentially, you're just IFS used for chronic symptoms is a way to turn down the danger signal by increasing this internal harmony and creating felt safety. So the fuel for the symptoms is just turned right down.
And
so
I've seen the same.
Pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Just incredible transformative changes, not just on the level of symptoms, but when I've worked with someone in this way, often we'll see a total change, like a fundamental shift in how a person lives his or her life. Just total change.
Yeah. From bedridden to hiking, I can remember, a client, we celebrated the day that she could pick up a ceramic plate because her brain had told her that it was dangerous to pick up anything that was heavier than a paper plate, and from there, just going on to, jumping right back into her career as an artist. So these are transformative, practices.
Wow. Oh, again, so just
people get their life back. Essentially,
they do.
Is what happens. They get their life back, but with a transformation. They get their life back, but with a relationship now with the part that may have used perfectionism or people pleasing as a protective strategy. And so they get their life back now, but with this increased harmony and compassion and just all of those qualities of calm, courage, connection, confidence, creativity, all of those lovely IFS self qualities.
Beautiful. So well stated. And thank you again, just for confirming what I see, again, on a personal level for me, but also helping me share this with people so they understand why it's something I talk about as much as I do and why I work with this so much. But IFS is not the only thing that you're trained in. I know. And I've heard you say that one of the other modalities that you use, Feldenkrais, has a beautiful synergy with IFS. And I was hoping maybe you could share a little bit more about how they work together.
Sure. On paper, they're very different. And so it might seem like, oh, what? How'd you just throw these two things together? But I see them at the core as essentially the same, because they're both awareness practices. And they share some really important underlying premises, I guess. They're both non-pathologizing. So, so with the Feldenkrais method, it's not like, oh, we've got to help you move better. Like, stop doing this. Here's the right way to do it. It's more like, hey, can you get curious about how you do move? And can you stay within a gentle, slow, curious, open-hearted interest? Oh, it feels too much for you to move your arm that way or to turn your head that way. Great, just imagine it. You know, so they're both non-pathologizing. They're not going in trying to fix something. They're both relational. Like, can you get curious about this part of you? Can you get curious about this sensation or movement? And they're both methods of inquiry. So they're both based on curiosity, and they're both based on calm. So sometimes, you know, like if someone has a really rigorous workout and they walk past, like maybe they're at a gym and they walk past a Feldenkrais class, they're like, why is everyone just laying there? They're not doing anything, are they? It is a very calm, very slow, very gentle. I mean, there are some, you know, some of the Feldenkrais lessons can be pretty strenuous, but usually the entry point things, it's like, all right, lie on your back and notice your contact with the floor. Okay, that, you know, like, and then if we do something very gentle, how slow are you willing to do it so that you can really feel what that process is? And so I just I find that those underlying things are so similar, but the last point in their similarity is kind of a, I don't know, it's like it's where the last little puzzle piece falls into place for me, and that is they both use a practice of differentiating in order to integrate. So if we want to bring more harmony to our, you know, internal, you know, mental, psycho, spiritual self, we're going to first differentiate these different parts and get to know them before we integrate them in our whole. And the same thing, if we want to feel more ease in our movement and feel more just yummy in our body, then we first differentiate very particular parts of our body. And so from that differentiation and befriending, then we can integrate into the whole. And there's also, when I say non-pathologizing, I think it goes even farther than just like, oh, it's okay, you have an angry part, or, you know, it's okay that this movement seems scary. I would say it's about like, how would I put it? It's about like leaning into the scariness, but in a gentle, comforting way. What's an example I can use? Okay, the Feldenkrais method, it's one of the sort of famous lessons is learning how to do a headstand. Well, most people don't need to do a headstand, but maybe somebody wants to learn how to do a headstand. So they go to a Feldenkrais practitioner, help me do a headstand. So they expect, if I'm going to learn to do a headstand, that you're going to put me upside down, probably lean me against a wall, right? Something like that. No. In the Feldenkrais method, to prepare to learn how to do a headstand, you would lie on the floor on your back. You would feel your contact with the floor. Then you would very slowly, very gently learn to lift one leg say your feet are standing, so your knees are bent, right? You lift one leg and drop it so that your foot drops to the floor. And then you just practice that over and over and just notice, how could that be done with more ease and more interest? And then maybe the other foot. And you're like, I'm sorry, I'm on my back and I'm just lifting my foot and dropping it. What's this got to do with a headstand? But like over time, what you do is you explore all the ways, maybe 2 feet, maybe your pelvis. What are all the different ways that you can befriend the feeling of falling? And once you've found all the ways to gently fall, then eventually you're learning how to stand on your head, because you know all the ways to fall. And you would never lean up against the wall, because that's trying not to fall.
Mm-hmm.
Where in the Feldenkrais method, you'd be like, what are all the yummy, safe ways that I could feel good about falling? And then one of those could be from holding myself erect with my head facing down. But you might never get to that stage. In the meantime, you've just felt what it feels like to lift a limb and drop it and know that gravity always has you. Gravity has never let us go.
I just, as you're saying this, I'm just thinking, why is this not being recommended to people who are dealing with dizziness, who have that sense of disorientation? Like it just seems to me this would be so particularly helpful for people with feeling like disoriented in their bodies.
Very much so. I don't know exactly why he said this, but Moshe Feldenkrais, the founder of the Feldenkrais method, was famous for saying that fear of falling is the most primal fear.
Wow. Yeah.
And, he had his reasons for that, and his, studies in child development, child physical development, and psychological development. And so much of many of the lessons are about helping to address that. In other words, like, what is balance? Well, balance isn't a static thing. Balance is always dynamic. So we're not designed to be still. We're designed to move. So what is feeling oriented and upright? Oh, that's about finding the horizon. So, you hear all the time in this mind-body work, people say, oh, get outside, enjoy the great outdoors. Well, wonderful. But for people who are experiencing dizziness, it might be more specifically like, find the horizon. Let the horizon, and maybe it's too much to try to physically view the horizon. So imagine the horizon. Like with the Feldenkrais method, you don't have to actually do the movement if that would be beyond threshold, if that would be scary, because you're using the same neural pathways if you simply imagine the movement. That's how gentle and slow the Feldenkrais method is. And so, with my work with the Feldenkrais method, I teach people how to, get up from seated to standing. And what's the most gentle way to do that? That feels like the sensory platform here is finding the horizon, and your balance is dynamic. And some of it is language. So an example I'm thinking about is some people say, oh, I have terrible balance because I can't stand on one foot. And I would say, well, okay, like, listen to yourself, first of all, because standing on one foot, there's a missing word that's implied there. Standing on one foot, you're implying that you're standing on only one foot because you have two. So now there's a lack. So of course that's scary. I'm standing on only one of my 2 feet. And so you try to stand on one foot and then, I feel like I'm going to fall. Well, yeah, because you've told yourself that there's a deficit here. But what if instead someone is standing and, if people want to try this, depending where they are, with their symptoms, but if they want to try this, holding onto the back of a chair or something, instead of trying to stand on one foot, just get curious about what it feels like to shift your weight from one hip to the other hip. And what can you do with your opposite knee to bend that opposite knee a bit that allows you to shift all your weight onto one hip? And then you'll find when all your weight is shifted onto one hip, your other foot is superfluous. It's not holding any weight. And you just don't need it. And you're balanced on one foot, but that's like a description from the outside. That's not an interoceptive description. That's not a helpful description. Standing on one foot is what it looks like from the outside. From the inside, it's shifting all your weight to one hip, which we're perfectly capable of doing. And there's no lack there. In fact, it's adding, and it's yummy sensation. And then that other foot can lift or not, can swing or not. We just don't need it because all of our weight is going down through one particular line. That's the Feldenkrais method.
So it's relational, like IFS. And there's a playfulness to it too. What you described, I know maybe playfulness isn't the first word that someone else would think of, but as you're describing this, I'm thinking of play. Like I'm thinking of the way, and by the way, I know absolutely zero about Feldenkrais, but it reminds me of watching my kids like learn to move.
Yeah, that's it.
Right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Like they would just kind of play around and see what happened. I mean, especially when I saw my kids learning to roll over for the first time. Like they were just kind of like move around and then, look what just happened. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And when they were playing around, they were playing with I like to think of it as their first playmate, which is gravity. Gravity is our first playmate. And it's like, if I lift this, there's a heaviness now. But it seems like gravity wants to pull my arm back down if I lift it. If I lift my head, it wants to plop back down. How do I play with this? And you're exactly right. Like babies will spend every waking hour until they just fall apart with exhaustion and just trying to figure out how to lift their head, trying to figure out how to roll over. And the interesting thing is that if a very young infant happens to just push in just the right way to flip themselves over the first time, they can't repeat it. It's that play and exploring their relationship to gravity that builds the neural pathways for that relationship and allows them to learn how to fall. And like, how weird. I want to go this way, so I got to push the other way. That's so weird, And that's what it is to learn how to be in our bodies, which is really learning how to think and feel.
How fascinating that this is so opposite how people are being taught to move in vestibular rehab. Because most of my folks, not everyone, but most of them have gone through at least one round or have been prescribed a round of physical therapy. And there, you're not really playing with movement. You're pushing yourself as far as you can to the point of intolerance. In order to like expand your tolerance, which again, for certain conditions clearly makes sense, right? But for our folks for whom the main problem is really neural pathways, not necessarily a physical problem, it seems that what you're describing, especially in people who are already dealing with high levels of threat, might be an alternative way to create neural
Yeah.
pathways.
Mm-hmm. To create neural pathways or to reawaken neural pathways that they probably already laid down when they were younger.
Yes.
And just, I had that response to what you said about physical therapy. I want to just backtrack and say, oh my goodness, if someone has had a particular injury, recovering from surgery, then they're working with a physical therapist can be so valuable. And yeah, those physical therapists need to do that, pushing that window of tolerance, et cetera. But this is something different. This is staying under threshold is very important. So what is the smallest movement that you can do that keeps you in the range of, I call it yumminess, keeps you in the range of like curious, playful, or at least just interested, like, huh. And if it feels uncomfortable, if it feels scary, if it feels dangerous, then you've gone too far. Back up, because what we're doing is we're expanding we're teaching our brain what is safe and building that somatic confidence and reawakening what some people would call somatic amnesia. Right.
So how do you think then about exposure and desensitization? Because this is something in the mind-body world, people do get uncomfortable, and it seems like they often need to get uncomfortable. So how do you?
I see it from two sides. One, just a quick little demonstration that I think will help. Like if you just clasp your fingers, interlace your fingers like so, and just notice what that feels like, right? It's like, well, okay. And I watched you. It didn't look like it was too difficult for you to do that. And now if you unclasp your fingers and then do it in the non-habitual way, so that the other thumb is on top.
That's hard.
And yeah, it's hard. What is it? Can you describe what it feels like? Is there a word or two that comes to mind?
It felt like tentative and a little off. Yeah.
Yeah, tentative, off. Yeah, it seemed like I saw you kind of laugh like, oh, this is weird or whatever. Then you can go back to the habitual way.
Yes.
Right. Right. So this habitual interlacing, we have a neural pathway for that. So you didn't have to think about it. I said, interlace your fingers, boom, just went like so. The other one, we don't have a neural pathway for that. So it can feel weird, uncomfortable. And for people with a very heightened alarm system, it can feel even dangerous, like, right? Because we don't have a neural pathway for it yet. But if for the rest of the interview, you and I went like this, then it'd be like just totally fine. No worries, right? So there is some aspect of learning and experiencing newness in this mind-body work that can feel strange, hard, challenging, weird, because we don't have a neural pathway for it. That's still, I think, manageable, so long as people stay what I call under threshold. But if we take our cues from, if we drop the hubris for a moment about being a human and take our cues from animal trainers and people who work with animals, like if you have a reactive animal, if you have a dog who barks and lunges when they see other dogs, like it's not going to improve by like getting them right there in the face with other dogs. You're not going to expose them to that and help them, but you can find what's the distance between, this dog I've got on the leash and other dogs or a dog. What's the distance at which they don't react? Great. Let's hang out there and make that yummy and comfy and rewarding. And then we can move a little closer at another time. How close? Close enough so that it is, maybe a step closer, but not so close that they start to bark and lunge, or even anything that brings more tension or alarm. We want to stay under threshold. We want to keep that barking, lunging from happening.
Right.
And like people who work with animals in a compassion and science-based way, they know how to help reactive animals stay under threshold, and humans can figure it out too with our own selves. So
yes. And
yeah.
And what you're describing, I want to really drive this point home. It's a skill that takes time to learn, and part of the process of recovery is figuring out your own nervous system and how to work with it. So there are going to be times when you push yourself too far to the lunging point, right?
Yeah.
And there are going to be times when you say, well, I really could have maybe come a little closer to that uncomfortable threshold.
Yeah.
And you didn't mess up. It's not going to set you back and send you back to square one. This is part of the learning process. Just information.
Information. Yeah. And so when people are using something like graded exposure, then I say, take a nice small chunk that feels easy, and it'll become boring. And that's when it's time for to up the ante a bit.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a client story spot, but I'm just along those lines. I'm thinking of someone who had put a lot of pressure on herself to go hiking. That to her was like the symbol of like a healthy person at her age should be hiking. And in fact, their family even had like, I'll call it like a cabin, where they could go. And so she would put her hiking shoes in the car, get to the cabin, not go hiking because she was afraid of whatever her particular symptoms were. She didn't want to activate them, right? So those shoes, she would carry them back and forth as she would go, and they became this symbol of awful failure. So the shoes became this bugaboo. And so we just started with the shoes. Like, the shoes are in the closet. Just picture the shoes and see what comes up there, and just work with that and see if and then eventually the shoes were out of the closet. The shoes were by the front door. The shoes were on the feet, but not laced, et cetera, et cetera. And, by taking these little tiny steps that might at first have seemed terrifying, then she's like, "What? I'm not going to just leave the shoes by the door. I'm going to put them on. And then once they're on, I'm not going to just stand on the front porch. I'm going to walk down to the end of the drive, and of course now she's hiking, easily and readily. But unless somebody has been through this chronic symptom business, they don't understand the level of anxiety that can come up just by seeing those hiking boots.
Yeah.
And it's real.
Yeah. Thank you for speaking to that and giving us a bit of an anecdote about how small that can look. And that
can look really small. Whatever. I say again and again to my clients and students will say, yeah, we've heard it before. But in every moment you can ask, what's the kindest choice for me in this moment? Anytime we're faced with something that stirs us up, what's the kindest choice for me in this moment? And for some people, like, I want to go hiking. The kindest choice is to put on the hiking boots and start walking. And for other people, the kindest choice is to, I don't know, look at the Patagonia catalog with people wearing hiking boots. Like, that's as close as they can get. And that feels like the kindest choice. Great. Wonderful place to start.
Beautiful. Susann, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm just so excited to have gotten to speak to you and to have you share this wealth of wisdom with people. I know people are going to be very enthusiastic when they hear this, and they're going to be banging on your door. So tell me what services you offer, and I will of course link to your website, and anything
Right.
else in the video or podcast description so people can access it. But please tell me what kinds of options do you have for people?
Right, exactly. So, yeah, and thank you for that. I really appreciate being able to speak about those. I do see individual clients, and I do have a wait list, but that wait list moves. So I encourage people, to reach out if that's what they're looking for. But I also offer classes. So these classes are not for people who are like, I don't know, is this medical? Is this mind body? I'm not sure. This is for people who are clear. Like, so people who have, watched your channel and they get it, but they want to learn how to access more self energy so that they can show up for their scared parts. Right. So I offer basically, it's a class that combines IFS and Feldenkrais that just helps people, learn to access more self energy. It's specifically for those with chronic symptoms. And that class has been going well enough that folks are now asking for a part 2 on that. So I'm very excited to be able to offer. So I'll have a 2-part class coming up here. And then also, just because I love to always just point people in this direction as well, I facilitate groups for Curable, the app. And for anyone who thinks that it is focused solely on pain, definitely not the case. I've facilitated groups for them for now, is it 5 years, I guess? And I usually have around 4 groups each session, and there's 4 sessions a year. And so there's 10, 12, 15 people in those groups. So I've seen a lot of people go through, and some do have backaches, some do have headaches, but lots of people have dizziness, fatigue, stomachs, everything you can imagine. So if that feels useful for people to just to help them feel less alone in conjunction with the work that they do with you, then I love to point people towards Curable, the app and the groups.
Thank you. Yes, and I'll as I said, I'll include my link. I have a 6-week free coupon for people so they can try the app and just check it out and see if it's the right fit. And it's very much in line with everything that we just talked about, and very much in line with everything we talk about here on the channel. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. Some people are app people, some people aren't, but at least knowing that resource is out there. And then, like I said, the groups through Curable are it's really nice to be with others who get it.
For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Susann, thank you. Thank you so much. Again, you've given everyone a lot to think about. And I really appreciate you and all the time you spent with me today. And that your little Cavalier pup agreed to hang out the whole time.
So great.
He did great.
I'm wondering. Yeah,
can you come say hi? They're Cavalier fans on my channel. So
oh my gosh. Yeah.
See him.
Yeah, he's snoozing. So
oh,
I'll just bring him out.
Oh, look, he's so sweet.
Little pup. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
This is the gift for people who stayed all the way till the end. They get to see him.
They get to see Darby. Oh, yes, he's a sweetie. I don't know. Does he?
I can see him. Yeah.
Yep.
I have a matching one right over there on the couch, but mine's older and fast asleep, and he's looking at me like I'm not coming over there. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's been very rainy here, and so he's been like, wow, I could get muddy and wet.
Yes.
And
fun.
Great. Yeah.
Fun.
And I did wake him up, so he's like, "Oh, what's going on?" But there you go. Say hi
sweetie.
Hi to the folks. Yeah, cool.
Dog.
So.
Perfect. Well, folks, if you wait till the end, you got the dog tax, so you win. And of course, I love to hear from you. So if you'd like to leave me any questions or comments, please drop them below. As always, if you could like this video, share it, subscribe to my channel, all of those things. Let me know that you love hearing content like this. And these things also help me reach more people. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Susann. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank
Bye,
you so
everyone.
much. Bye.